All right, welcome to another episode of Shedcast, the shed hunting podcast for all things shed hunting. Today with us, we have Seth Bowman from Oklahoma. So Seth, I found him on TikTok. We were bouncing around, great shed hunter. So I've seen a lot of things kind of coming out of his corner, but I definitely wanted to chat with him and get his side of the story, where he came from, all that information. Seth, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Howdy there. My name is Seth Bowman. I am from Oklahoma, as he said. I'm an industrial painter who just kind of gets out in the woods as much as he can around work and everything else I've got going in life right now. So,
Awesome. So one of the big things, I literally found you on TikTok doing a live one day,
uh
popped in there. You guys were talking sheds, which was awesome. Love to do that. And so I said, "Hey, come on to Shedcast. Let's talk shed hunting." So here we here we are. One of the things I wanted to talk to was just in general, I guess, just how you got started on TikTok. You've got some really funny stuff, so I really like that content. Where did you get started with that? And it kind of just took off from there. If you can tell us a little bit about that.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I started on TikTok just posting random stuff I thought was funny and doing like the little Timmy jokes and lip syncing. We all know how TikTok started. And then one
Mhm.
day I just came across a couple of pages that were outdoorsy. They were hunting, fishing, shed hunting. I was like, dude, I do that constantly. I can definitely hit it off with some of these people, and it's snowballed into what it is now. Up to 180 some thousand followers on that one account, and most of them just follow me for my shed hunting content every spring. I'm
Mhm.
gonna hear from for a while, and then when shed season comes, everybody floods back in and super excited for it. So,
That's awesome. So, Oklahoma, are you mostly bow hunter, archer? What do you mostly do?
so archery season runs from October 1st to January 15th, so it's
Mm.
super long. The area where I hunt and the land that I hunt really doesn't lend itself as much to archery hunting. My biggest buck I've ever harvested is an archery buck, be my 5x6 muley. But
Yeah.
we just don't, it just where I hunt just doesn't lend itself as much to that. So it's been 2 seasons since I actually harvested a buck with my bow. Muzzleloader and rifle season is really where I get most of my deer.
Nice. So a little mix of everything. I like
Yes,
that
sir.
too. Just being able to mix it. That's what's nice about archery. The seasons are longer, so you can kind of dice in with the rifle hunts and make
Yes,
for
sir. Yes, sir.
more time for hunting.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And then how did you even get started in hunting and shed hunting to begin with?
So I was actually adopted by my grandparents. I've lived with them for a long time. And
Hmm.
me and my grandpa, as a kid, I was super hard headed. And me and him really just connected on the outdoors. I loved
Hmm.
the fishing. I loved hunting. I loved everything about it. And I could talk to him about it. And that's what we really connected on. And I remember deer coming through the house every year. And we lived out in New Mexico at the time, and we'd go out and we'd shed hunt for elk sheds out in the mountains. And it was just a really good time spending time together and just being in the woods. And I just never kind of got away from that. I realized that I could go hide out in the woods and do all kinds of fun stuff that a lot of these people that live in town or live in big cities, they'd never even experienced. And so I still stop by and show my grandpa every shed I find. It's just something that we really connected on. So
Awesome. Definitely good to connect with family, and definitely good, really good that he showed you that, connected with him on it, and then here you are doing it,
yes, sir, yes, sir.
carrying it on. Let's talk a little bit about your shed hunting in general. So, out of Oklahoma, let's kind of break it down a little bit. You said some of the areas that you're in aren't necessarily conducive to archery hunting. And I know we spoke a little bit about it before, and we talked a little bit about the differences across Oklahoma. So if you don't mind elaborating on that just a little bit, and then we'll dive into just some other stuff I wanted to touch on. So from east to west in Oklahoma, how is it different across the board, and how does that affect shed hunting?
Yes, sir. So on the west side, you've got that really dry climate, lots of little thickets and just trash scattered throughout a lot of the pasture land. You do have a couple of river bottoms out there that are really good for deer. And so whenever I shed hunt out there, my main resource I'm looking for is water. So if there's a water source, like a river or a creek or something, that's where I find a lot of those sheds because it's hot there. Then deer are constantly trying to get to a water source. And out there, I don't worry as much about feed. If I find a thicket, a group of trees, or water, I can usually find a shed out there. As you move further east, you get into a little bit more trees kind of in central Oklahoma. So it changes a little bit more. There's a lot wetter, got a lot more rain coming in every year. So you're still going to be hitting your water sources like that. And that's what I actually hunt is a water source. I hunt over the top of a pond. And this last year, I had it all set up where it'd be really easy to archery hunt. And then it rained and it lit that pond up and pushed all the deer out about 60, 70 yards. So that's why it wasn't really conducive this year to bow hunting. And I don't really have that many trees on that pasture, so I can't hang any tree stands or anything like that. It's all on the ground, in blind or set up for a spawn stock, which I thoroughly enjoy, which my big muley I pulled up a second ago, that come off of a spawn stock. And as you get further east, even still, it's a lot more thick woods. It's a lot more wooded and a little bit better hills and stuff. So out that way, it's pretty much just point in your direction and kind of walk through the hills, find your low spots where the deer are getting down into area where there isn't as much wind and stuff like that. Still water sources, still food sources, but it's just kind of how I've shed hunted that way. The south-facing slopes and all that kind of stuff. The farther east as you go, you get into them thicker woods where you kind of just point in the direction you want to go to. I highly recommend some sort of mapping app like Onyx or something like that. Just picture a spot where you want to get to and work your way through the woods to that point. Maybe it's a water source, something like that. But that's how I do whenever I'm in thicker woods. I kind of just start at a certain point and aim for another point on my map. Try to hit as many, like they say, the south-facing slopes and that kind of stuff as I go through that thicker woods. So
You said south facing slopes and then just in general trying to get into maybe bedding areas too or
yes,
in
sir.
between.
Yes, sir. So stuff that looks like it's going to be a good opportunity, like you said, bedding. So if there's a little opening in them trees with a little bit taller grass, because our deer out here seem to really like bedding down in a little bit taller grass, something where they can get out of the wind and hide at the same time. So I aim for areas with a little bit of water, a little open area with a little bit of grass in there, maybe only 20, 30 yards wide or something, but just big enough where them deer can get in there and bed down and stay in cover pretty good.
And they primarily whitetail with a mixture of mule deer, or you have a pretty good population of both?
So where I live, it's all whitetail. If you
Mhm.
go further west, if you're over there in the Panhandle area, you'll have elk, mule deer, and everything over there. And if you're in the southern part of the state, you could run into elk as well.
That's pretty wild, actually, to think elk being like in that northern part of Texas and Oklahoma area too. Pretty cool.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They've actually, the herd out there has gotten pretty extensive. They've opened up a season where it matches with deer season.
Mhm.
Whatever season it is for deer, that's what you can use for that. You still have to call in and check and make sure that an X amount of elk haven't been harvested in those areas. Population is really starting to grow out there.
That's pretty cool. Primarily public, private. I know a lot of states back east or Midwest have less public land and more private land, but what kind of the differences are what you're seeing versus what you use?
So Oklahoma and the Corps of Engineers and everybody in Oklahoma did a really good job of setting aside ground for Oklahoma folks to use for just recreation, whether you're hunting or camping or doing whatever on the properties. So a lot of the bigger lakes in Oklahoma have Corps of Engineer or public hunting land around it, and there's a ton of them spread out throughout the entire state. Now, if you live pretty close to one, then it's really easy to access, and you can get in there and you can shed hunt a lot. You can also hunt and fish on them a lot. So I do a healthy bit of shed hunting on public land, and then I do quite a bit on private land, just whenever I get a chance. Now, people are starting to kind of realize that shed hunting is pretty cool, so it has got a lot more competitive on both public and private land because I can drive down the road and knock on 10 different doors, and all of them are going to say, "Oh yeah, well we do have so and so already shed hunting it," and I know usually who it is that's shed hunting it. But on the public lands, as long as you get back in there a little bit further where most people aren't willing to go, because a lot of these people are just getting into it like you once were, And so they'll go a mile in and then they're pretty much done. So if you go back in there and you're in an area where nobody really goes to, you still have a really good chance on public ground to pick up a pile of sheds.
With the increase in competitiveness in general, or just public lands are also just busy, sometimes not even people hunting, or yeah, some people hike in there for fishing or hike in there just to hike in there. Are you seeing lots of boot tracks? What are you doing when you see stuff like that? Or are you just doing your own thing and not really crossing a lot of people?
So whenever I go shed hunting, there's usually other people out somewhere. If I know a great spot on a piece of public ground and somebody else is already in that parking lot, I will not go in there because I do not want to give away my hand. If I walk in there and they see me walk in, and then a couple hours later they see me walk out with a couple of handfuls of sheds, that's probably where they're going to head the next day. So usually if there's salt park there, I won't go in there. I always take a really big shed hunting pack that I can stuff antlers in, and I'll go back in there if nobody's around. Last year was a little bit tougher year for me because every time I went in somewhere, there was boot tracks everywhere. And last year, like we were talking about, I followed in a trail that had boot tracks and dog prints. And I went in there and I still found a couple of really good sheds. And I meant to pull one out for you. I found the match side to one that I picked up the day that we were talking about with the dogs and the shed hunters in there. I found his match side this year off of last year's shed. So that was pretty cool.
Oh wow. Yeah, that is really cool. And then just in general to be able to pick up more sheds even though it's still competitive. There's enough out there for everybody, but sometimes it can feel like that. When I shed hunted in the Midwest and Nebraska, I felt like it felt pretty competitive on a lot of smaller public private pieces, where other people have permission or everyone has permission in general, and then everybody's going for it at different times, but you just might be in there at the right time or took the right turn.
Yes, sir. And that's, even though there's boot prints in there, these deer are not all walking in there and just dropping them instantly. You'll have a one group of bucks walk in there, and half of them might drop aside, or two or three of them out of that group might drop aside. So whenever you see the boot tracks in there, don't automatically be like, oh no, there's no sheds left out here. I'm just too late. No, every once in a while, still go check those areas because I had bucks drop all the way from late December last year all the way till March. So every time you walk through an area, even if you're rewalking, which I highly recommend, stop, go in those areas that hey, in the previous years, there's been a whole pile of antlers in this area. I'd still go even if it's just a quick trek through there. Maybe you're not grid searching that area now, but still take a little trek through there and just be like, oh, okay, well, there's one there, or there's one over there, because each one you pick up adds to the pile. So just because someone else got in there and maybe picked up a handful, that doesn't mean there won't be another handful in there for you to get. So
Cool. And like you mentioned, just revisiting, you're talking about just re-walking some of the areas you've already walked earlier in the season or previous year, like you mentioned before, that one spot that you said you picked up a match to this year that you had walked last year.
yes, sir.
Were you pretty close? Were you pretty close to that last year, or were you like just walking a different part of that property?
I was within 200 yards of that shed. Uh, and it was my fault because I didn't quite rewalk my same path. I found that one side and I was like, okay, well, logic is telling me that this deer either came from them woods or from down here in the bottom, headed one way or the other. And instead, what he did was he turned and went about 150 to 200 yards up and dropped that other side right there in a little pile of wood, pretty much, a couple of down trees right there. And so I just didn't walk back up through that low spot. I decided to go into the trees instead of going back towards where that shed had actually dropped.
And that there's never really any wrong way to go. You just go where you think you're supposed to be going. And then, like you just said, your line might be different the next time. And then you come across something you either missed or something that you could have, I guess, turned and walked that direction and maybe missed the other one that was over in the other spot.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's one thing I'll 100% tell people. Don't ever use your brain. Your brain is an awesome tool. I 100% thought he either went that direction or he came from where I was just at. Now, sometimes like just go with your gut. Sometimes your gut is telling you, hey, go look in this field over here.
Mm.
The other evening, I was going to jump in one of the fields out there that I really like and I found pretty cool sheds in. And instead, my friend was like, hey, man, shed number such and such is over here in this field. And so I was like, okay, we'll go rewalk this spot. Went out there, and sure enough, the shed that I was looking for was laying right there. And I went back later and went to the other side, didn't find anything. And if I went with my brain instead of my gut, I would have never found that one shed. So gut feelings are pretty important.
I feel like that comes with your hunting experience and shed hunting experience and knowledge, right? You're putting yourself in a position to where you're trying to think which way are the deer coming from, or is that what you're saying? You're going with your gut feeling on this is a pretty good spot, or maybe I pre-scouted it and seen deer over this way, or in the past season I did, and then going that way.
In the field that I was talking about, I found three fresh. And so I
Yeah.
knew the deer were using that field a lot more heavily than they were going to be using this other field. The other field, I was expecting to find maybe a few old sheds or maybe something that just had been drug up by a coyote or something into that field because still too early to just start hiking out the woods around here. But them feed sources, which the deer aren't hitting till later in the evening and then throughout the night, there's I'm a little bit more comfortable with walking right now. So just decided, man, I found them other ones out there. There's something telling me that I will find another shed if I just go looking there. And it's one of my favorite kind of sheds, actually. It's just a tall, thick spike. And I'm starting to get a pile of them just because I find them every time I'm out. But it is really cool to just be able to walk out there and be like, I know there's one going to be in this corner, and looked over and right there in that corner on the hill was just an antler. So
Well, basically, from experience and from watching the deer, you're seeing they're hitting one feed source a little bit better than the other. So your gut instinct is just telling you, check these edges, check these fields before you really start pushing into the big woods.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. And like I said, I knew there was going to be a shed over there in that corner because that's the corner that the deer usually come out of. And when I went back in there, sure enough, it was just laying right there on that side of the hills. One of my favorite kind of sheds. It was just a long, thick spike shed. So I knew them deer would be funneling into that field on that one side.
What's one of the biggest ones you had found shed hunting?
One of the biggest would be this guy right here. This is my 85-inch side. I found it with a buddy, and wherever you find a whitetail shed this big, brain doesn't automatically, at least mine didn't, think antler. My brain thought, go ahead and step over that stick. I was standing like a foot and a half from it, just looking straight down at it whenever I picked it up. Me and one of my buddies that actually went out to go shed hunting, and he stopped at a rut right over there beside me, and I was probably 6 or 7 yards from him and just looked down, and this was laying at my feet.
Wow,
Just
that's a
one
big.
of
The mass on that thing, dude, is incredible.
25
Holy
inches
cow.
through the main beam. Just a ridiculous shed. One of my favorites I've ever picked up.
Yeah, that's a big one. So one of the other things that I was going to chat with you about was public and private. Obviously, with private, you've got to get permission and work that angle. So what are you doing for something like that if you're seeing somewhere you want to be? And then other people, if they're listening, what can they do to soften that up and maybe secure a private land spot?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So one of the most important things while you're knocking on doors and stuff is to use your head. Whenever I knock on a door, I will take a few steps back, keep your hands out of your pockets, make sure you're paying attention and respectful whenever they walk out. If it's an older rancher or farmer, I always reach out and shake their hand and introduce myself. If it's an old rancher's wife or farmer's wife, I usually just stay back because they just have a kid standing on their porch that they don't know. So I try to make sure I'm non-threatening, but I'm also respectful at the same time because I'm a bigger person and I don't want them to be like, oh, well, we had this weird guy. But after I introduce myself, I love to explain to them. I usually carry an antler with me and say, howdy there, my name is Seth Bowman. I would like to shed hunt your property. If it's a farmer, I usually use the save you from getting a flat on your tractor's route. And if it's
Mhm.
a rancher, I usually just go with the normal. I love to shed hunt this group of trees over here or this piece of property over here. And if they say no, respectfully shake their hand, say, okay, I understand, absolutely. And I usually get out of there. If they're on the
Mhm.
fence, I usually will just be like, hey, I promise not to trash the property. I promise the only things I'll be taking in there is going to be my bag, my pack. Usually I'll take a practice shed with me
Mhm.
and whatever I'm going to be drinking throughout the day. Uh, that way they kind of know what to expect whenever I'm on there. Make sure you promise to either use the actual roads on the property or just not even drive on the property at all. And that usually will help you as well.
Pretty good advice there, especially in a lot of that people just, or maybe people in the past have burned that bridge, so they're sometimes a little wary on trusting new hunters or something like that.
Absolutely.
Arizona has quite a bit of public land, so I don't feel like I usually do that. But in Nebraska, when I hunted there, man, there was some times when I didn't have permission in certain places, and I wish I did, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Like
there's
just
there's quite a
watching.
few pieces of ground I would love to have permission on, but I'm about $5 million too poor to even talk to them people.
Judging by the stack of antlers behind you, I think you're doing pretty good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Picked up 175 sheds last year, not including breaks or partials. Uh, of course, a break is just a tine or a main beam or something without the pedicle on it that got broke while they were fighting. And then what I call a
Mhm.
partial is an antler with enough of the skull cap that it clearly wasn't a shed and something happened where that deer probably did not make it and it just has a big chunk of bone on it. So that's what I call a partial because it's a
Mhm.
partial deadhead, most likely.
That makes sense. That's a pretty good way to look at it. I have found pieces of elk chunks and
Yes,
different little broken up dead heads and stuff like that. Not always
sir.
the whole thing, that's for sure. It's always kind of funky
Yeah,
and to wonder
yeah.
what happened, especially with
There's,
as much lions that we have out here in the desert. We find a lot that are crunched like right up in the face. And
yes, sir.
typically we chalk those up to lion kills, depending on how you find them.
The wild dogs and coyotes and stuff that do it. So.
I was sitting in a tree stand one time in Nebraska and I could hear them. Coyote ran right up underneath the tree stand and I could hear him attacking a deer. I just couldn't pinpoint where. It was pretty
Yes,
interesting. One of the other things I was going to chat with you about was just in general. We talked a little bit about some of the things that you're talking about doing or tip wise that work with picking up 175 sheds in a year is pretty good. A lot of walking, a lot of sheds. But what are you doing to set yourself up to do something like that for people listening or just in general, people just trying to get better at shed hunting? We know there's a few things that people can do that might set themselves up for more success or to get better. Do you want to throw some of those things out? Maybe things that you do that others might not,
Don't
or
have any other
things
hobbies.
someone can
That's the biggest thing. No.
do? Yeah,
Make sure to
that's
take
true.
care of what's going on in your life. Uh, Work is very important. My woman, what
Mm,
she says goes. If she says you're gonna take a break from shit hunting, then that's what goes. But if I have a free moment or a free just second in time, I'm thinking, hey man, if I go look at this field today, that gives me tomorrow and the next day to go look at this field. I don't have to do anything this weekend. I'm not working. She doesn't have anything planned. We're good to go. And I'll just start kind of mapping out the spots I want to hit throughout the week or on the weekend all the way. I have my next 2 weeks pretty much planned where I'm going to go shed hunt. Um,
hmm
I always make sure to uh, have enough supplies with me. So, like, I highly recommend before you go shed hunting, figure out how much water you're going to need to drink, how many liquids, whatever it is. Uh, Take extra because if you are out there 3 miles deep or 5 miles deep or 10 miles deep, you're like, man, I would love to go another couple of miles up here, but then that's going to be X amount of miles back, and I've only got 2 water bottles left, and I only brought three. Make sure to go through your pack. Make sure that you're taking enough, especially water and stuff, or snacks or toilet paper, whatever supplies you're going to need to be able to trek that extra couple of miles through there. Make sure to take it.
hmm
Dry socks, that kind of stuff. the little things that you do like that, and I understand that you only have so much room in your pack and you can only carry out so much. But if you do those little things like that, you're not going to have to turn around early. You're not going to have to stop and be like, oh, well, I got to catch my breath or whatever because I ain't got any water. Got to slowly limp back. The more you plan for this stuff, like I said, planning throughout the week and stuff, or planning ahead and saying these are the supplies I'm going to need, that's less stuff you got to do the day of, first off, because the less time that you're in the woods is less time you're in the woods, if that makes any sense. So
Hmm.
planning this stuff out well in advance, uh, just the self control of, hey, I could go this much further, but tomorrow, if I go another couple of miles today, then maybe I don't won't get up tomorrow and go shed hunt. So it's just everything's I plan out very meticulously um, where to go, how long I plan on being out there, how many miles I plan on being out there, what supplies I'm gonna need. And I mean, it usually doesn't change for me. I've got some first aid stuff in my bag just in case something happens. Plenty of
Hmm.
fluids. I usually carry about a gallon and a half, 2 gallons of water with me into the woods every time, plus whatever other drinks I'm going to drink. So I plan on my pack being 30, 40 pounds of like it, and then however much with the antlers on the way out. So I think it's just something that's super vital, especially if you're going to try to do, like last year was 700 miles for me. I was putting in
Wow.
60 some mile weekend and then hiking out every evening. So it's just
Hmm.
planning is the biggest thing if you want to really put up high numbers on either the miles or on the shed side.
When you're planning some of that, are you planning your routes through these properties too? Like I'm gonna grid this particular spot or I'm gonna walk up this ridge and you stick to that plan each time, or are you just letting everything go and just going where the wind takes you when
So
you
I'm
get
more
there,
of
like
a
boots on ground?
Yes, sir. So well, I'm more of a, I'm gonna hit this spot right here. I'll drop a
Hmm.
pin there on my Onyx, or I'll know exactly where that location is because I've hiked out almost every inch of these woods. That is my goal. How I
Hmm.
get there changes every time, though. If I'm hiking through there, I'm like, dude, this is a great path that wasn't in here last time I was in here. A great deer trail. Oh man, there's a couple of rubs up there. There's some really good old scrapes over here. I just kind of zigzag through there until I get to the point where I want to be. Then I'll do my shed hunting in that spot. And then I'll go to the next point because usually I'll try to do like 4 or 5 different areas that I definitely want to hit, whether those are areas that I've picked up ridiculous amounts of sheds in. And ridiculous to me is like 6 sheds within like 20 yards or something. But if it's a
Hmm.
really good spot where I found a lot of sheds or found big sheds, then I just kind of zigzag my way through there till I hit that pin, do my shed hunting in that spot, and then I'll just kind of work my way to the next point, and I could go 400 yards and put 2 miles on my boots just from going back and forth, grid searching or getting distracted and looking at every little deer trail or whatever, and just kind of work my way back and forth until I hit that spot where I need to be. That's
Nice.
generally how I shed hunt a lot of my stuff.
So keeping your eyes open for things that may trigger, like, hey, I need to slow down a little bit and grid search a little harder.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And something that we call them branchlers. Everybody's got a
Hmm.
different name for them, but whenever those catch your eyes, that's whenever you need to really start slowing down. I personally believe that they are put out there as a practical joke, just to mess with shed hunters. But I will tell you, every time I see something like that and I slow down, usually, well, if I quit dropping it, usually I'll find a shed. So
Hmm.
last year, I, like you said, see something caught my eye. I needed to slow down. I looked over and I picked up my second set of spike sheds for the year. Just
Hmm.
12 little wonky dudes right there. And it's
Yeah,
just because I
got some little.
stopped, just because I stopped, I was like, okay, well, that's not an antler, but those two are. And I believe that that the branchlers are set there to distract you from the antlers that are probably right there within the vicinity.
That's funny. That is very interesting. Yeah. I call them like stick sheds when you see a stick
Yes,
that's just got the perfect shape and it looks just like a
yes,
shed.
sir. Yes,
And
sir.
it's going to make you walk a long ways sometimes to figure out if it's a stick or if it's a shed.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I mean, even on that, I'll say this real quick. Uh, like I was saying, the self control, knowing how far you can and can't walk. I also believe in self control. Whenever I see an antler, it can 100% be an antler. I try
Mm,
to keep my heart rate low. I try to keep my brain kind of even until I walk up there and grab that shed and I'm holding it. I don't let myself accept that it's a shed just because whenever you're on mile 10 of your hike and you walk up on that branchler and you've already let your heart rate get super high and you've let your brain go crazy and you walk up there and it's not an antler, it just puts you low as a snake's belly and you don't feel like really going further. You're like, man, I knew that was a shed. And you get in your head. And so
mhm.
personally, I will walk up on a shed and make sure it's a shed and hold it before I'm even like, oh, okay, and get super excited. Um, because a lot of times, and that's just because of experiences where I've walked up on a stick and been like, oh, no, you know what, I'm done today. And
Mhm.
that last year was the first year I was like, man, if you just stay calm until you're actually holding it, you'll do a lot better for yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely have had that happen before for sure. I've
Yes,
even had ones where I'm like, I just don't think that's an antler. And I'm like, but I'm gonna check anyways. And I check, and sure enough, it's a small shed. And it's just for whatever reason, whatever angle, or there's like, I've had a stick laying over one. I've had a stick laying across one. Yeah. And then I
yes,
just
sir.
couldn't tell, because there was a stick going one way and the antler branching out the other way. And I'm like, that looks weird. I don't know why, but, and then sure enough, it
Yes,
happened to
sir.
be one too.
This one here that's how this one right here was. I 100% was like, that's got to be shed, but it was laying like that on a hillside.
Mhm.
And I was like, well, we're going to walk up there. We're going to see. And you get to see this first. Nobody else has got to see this, not even TikTok. But
Uh,
I seen that one laying there, and I waited till I was up there on it and sat on the hill next to it before I let myself accept, oh, you found another shed. So,
mhm.
uh, because I just get too pumped whenever I find sheds.
Oh yeah. No, it's definitely exciting. And then there's definitely those ones that are in question that are just laying out there to test you, see how good your
Mhm.
eye is
Yes,
and how
sir.
willing you are to go get it. So a few of the things we talked about, just being prepared,
Mhm.
definitely walking and not being afraid to rewalk your tracks or some of your areas that you've already covered earlier in the year just to kind of make sure. And I think timing is definitely important, especially
Yes,
in
sir.
some of these places that they really rely heavily on these like feed sources and they're kind of hanging in those areas because of it.
Yes, sir.
Kind of in your, is there any of those feed sources that you've noticed that are much more superior or keep deer in those areas to shed long enough?
Now wheat. That is by far the best food source that you can look for. If you have trees, water, and bare ground, you'll probably find some sheds. But if you have winter wheat, trees, and water source, you will definitely find antlers. And out here, especially because most of the land is either just pasture land and stuff like that. If you can
Mm-hmm.
find one of those food sources, that's where you're getting all your deer bunched up at. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think the one field that I really love to go to, I think there's probably 40 sheds picked up on it. I know I picked up about 20. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's just so much deer because they'll come from a mile away just to feed at the one food source since it is going to be the best food source unless they just want to eat dry grass. So winter wheat, if you can find, if you are shed hunting and packers and stuff, look for
Mm-hmm.
bales because if it's like a corn stalk bale or maybe a milo bale or something kind of odd, that grain bale. A lot of times them deer will be up there by those eating and even just hay bales. If you get a lot of snow and stuff in your area, them deer, all my buddies up north are always sending photos and videos where the bucks went up there to them bales and were knocking hay out of them and dropped their sheds right there beside them. I use alfalfa bales on my rubs out here for the deer, but uh, they seem to work pretty good out there up north and everywhere else. So
Mm-hmm. You're talking you put alfalfa bales out?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This year I put two alfalfa bales out on uh, my main property. I'd really love to harvest deer off of, and
Mm-hmm.
I have tons of trail cam photos. Was really hoping to get the bucks in there to shed right there in front of the camera, but I
Mm-hmm.
stuck two bales down, ran a T-post through the center so the bales can move and turn and twist, but they can't get drug off or ripped open or
Mm-hmm.
stomped off or anything. So, because that field has horses in it, and I was trying to keep the bales away from them, but and
Mm-hmm.
mainly to where the deer can go up there and rub and push on them, and they can turn it on that T-post as much as they want. They're never going to get it off of there. So,
And I'm sure they're just chomping away anyway, so they're not too
yeah,
worried
they
about
they
dragging it off. Yeah,
I had eight does sit there all night and just munch on the bales.
good. That's pretty good actually. With some of your like edge habitat seems to be pretty popular when it comes to sheds, whether the deer bedding along that edge habitat or transitioning out of thick woods and into a feed field. Have you noticed that, or have you picked up a lot of sheds in those little transition zones?
So yes, sir, absolutely, absolutely. Like whenever people ask me in lives, what do you recommend? Transition areas are by far one of the things that I'm going to recommend the most. Early season shed hunting feed is going to be number one or right there close. But the transition areas between where they are going from bedding to feed or feed to water or water to bedding, those are going to be
Mm-hmm.
really important because the deer are getting up. And if you hunt a lot, you'll notice the bucks, wherever they go out towards that field, they're going to sit on the edge of it. And they're going to be watching, seeing what else is moving out there in the field. They're going to feed along the edge a little bit. I've slowly
Mm-hmm.
spoke to them. They're going to be right back in the woods. So they're spending a lot of time just right there on the edges of those. Now, that's usually those transition areas. A lot of them are either going to have like a tree line in them or a fence or something like that, where them deer either jumping over a fence or walking through these trees. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's something that I highly recommend. Now, usually where I live between feed and water is going to be taller grasses a lot of times or creek bottoms. So whenever they're walking through those taller grasses, I mean, it is hard to find sheds in tall grass, but you've got great deer trails that you can walk, and they're going to be brushing their antlers against everything through there. Once they go to a creek, they're going to drop down to the bottom and then pop back up. And I found tons and tons of sheds in dry creek bombs where they just kind of went through a low spot to get to an old pond or to another body of water or even a hole that holds a little bit of water in the creek. I found a ton of sheds just right there at the bottom. So,
Yeah, it's pretty good. I've found a lot in the bottoms or even up the draws, like just kind of taking like a nice easy route up a hill or something.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
So we talked about just obviously being patient, checking your areas over and over, even if you have to. Then obviously being prepared, which is definitely a big and important factor, especially the longer you're going to go or the longer you want to be out there, right? You want to be prepared. And then you were
Yes,
talking a
sir.
little
Yes,
bit
sir.
about the winter sources, which is great to know too. The transition areas, winter wheat being a good one. And then obviously the transition areas where they're kind of hanging, kind of bedding, maybe getting some sun, maybe just hanging out there as they're going in and out of thick to wide open fields.
Yes, sir.
But that's all great information. And then even those transition areas into the tall grass, which I've seen a lot of deer and a lot of that stuff too. But it seemed like they were able
Yeah.
to just kind of disappear in those things. So they
Oh,
definitely
yes,
like
sir.
them.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and that's what I find a lot
Um,
of deer bedding in is that tall grass like that.
mhm.
You'll be walking through there and just all of a sudden it opens up and there's a couple of feet wide and a couple of feet deep where it's all just matted down and then it's back to that tiny deer trail going back out of it and then you'll find another one.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, little bedding areas, and
yes,
it's
sir.
funny because those areas are almost right up underneath your nose, where they're almost like you could see across there, but then you can't, and they're just tucked in just enough where they can see most things or hear most things, smell most
Yes,
things,
sir.
and then no
Yes,
one
sir.
or people just walk right by them anyway. Well, we can start wrapping it up, but I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us and breaking down Oklahoma a little bit because I feel like there's so many different places and so many different ways to shed hunt. So I
Yes,
always
sir.
appreciate shed hunter's perspective and sharing that with us too. Some people don't want to share their secrets, and others are willing to do it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm still gonna
But,
find sheds no matter how many tips I give. I'll still find one or two a year. So
absolutely. And you're still out pre-scouting right now and just looking
yes,
to see
sir.
what maybe a hot spot.
Like I said, a few deer are starting to drop. It's still quite a bit early, but here in the next few weeks, I start kind of easing my way into the woods and try to get just a little bit further in there. So, I've got a couple of herds right here by the house that I kind of judge off of. Uh, and once they really starting to drop, then I'll start really getting after it. But right now, it's still just a touch early to really start running through the woods. So
That's good. Easing your way in from the outside in versus going straight in and spooking them all out of there.
yes, sir, absolutely. Now, I mean, some pieces of ground are big enough where you can do it, and then you just got to kind of move 300 yards away and hang out over here, and then they'll move back and they'll stay on that property the entire time. But some of these pieces of private now, these deer have been trained like, man, if you see a person, you better run because they're bad news. Sometimes on the private properties, them deer will be in the next county before you can even do anything. So, public lands, and be careful. But private land, definitely, if you're wondering if you should hold off, I probably would. Cameras are your best friend. If you guys start getting photos of all you do having shed, then definitely go look. But if you only have 1 or 2 bucks dropped, unless one of those 2 bucks is something you really want, I would stay out of there until you have a few more. So,
Hmm. Definitely good information right there. Seth, tell everybody where they can find you and follow along with you so that way, if anyone doesn't know who you are, they can find you, or some of the other people, if they do know, they can follow you on other socials or anything like that.
yeah, absolutely. So my TikTok is going to be Seth Dakota. It'll be Seth Bowman will be the actual name. It'll have a picture of me holding the 85-inch shed, just about like that. And then on Instagram, it is S Dakota 2, is my main Instagram. So those are
Mhm.
the easiest places to find me. And if you guys have questions, definitely reach out. I'm always down to make a video. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Seth, I appreciate you coming on, and everybody, thanks for listening to Shedcast. Follow along for more great things coming down. Thank you.
thanks for having me.